I've never done a fireside chat on Scribe Academy. This is our first fireside chat, and
Oh,
we're talking
wow.
about public toilets. Yeah, see how I go. I've got some questions. I've kind of briefed Roger a little bit. So before we kind of jump into the detail, let's just zoom out because you understand, I mean, a little bit about yourself, Roger. How long you've been in the industry and what changes have you seen over time? I'd be interested to know that.
Okay,
And
so,
how far
so
do you
I've,
go back? Yeah.
I've been in the industry since 2006. I've been a counsellor since 2007. Um, I've seen the industry change significantly, partly to deal with standalone public loos that are individual, so unisex. You go in the loo, there's a wash station, and often you pay. So in 2012, we introduced paying in Cotswolds District Council, and that was the first step for us at Healthmatic at the time to go into that side of the market. And it's exploded since. So you in those days it was like 20 pence as opposed to the original spend a penny, back from the British exhibition. But now it's in, dare I say it, in Westminster, it's 70 pence. So it does change. It has gone up. I think there's a loo actually on the South Bank which charges £1. And needless to say, that does cause some consternation from the public. But one can explain that as being something that is not particularly, oh, there's the fire, that is not particularly easy to run. We experience all the things that you'd expect. And my stock phrase is sex, drugs, rock and roll, but not so much rock and roll. Apart from the fact that if they're well looked after and they're in an area where it's busy, you won't get the problems that you'd expect from the original statement, i.e., sex and drugs. But it does depend on how busy the loo is. So, couple of phrases. First thing is an easy loo to run is a busy loo. The best thing from your perspective, managing a loo, is a shut loo is better than a dirty loo, simply because the public then don't complain about it. They just see it as being vandalized, and you put up as being vandalized. And that's a trick that a lot of people use, and it's sensible. The other thing is staffing is incredibly difficult in these days, because if you're paying something around 13 to 17 pounds an hour, finding people is really difficult. And the more touristy you are, the more difficult it becomes, particularly in summer when you need it most.
Okay, cool. And actually, just in terms of trends, are public facilities increasing or decreasing?
They are
In
decreasing. So in the last 30 years, we've lost around 40% of the public loos. Some of them are simply wrongly cited and not used anymore, but they are a discretionary service. So it's something that a district council, which is the tier that normally looks after them, gets rid of simply because they are tight on cash. And we know that most councils are tight on cash right now. And I think the most interesting thing is that 70% of councils where the tier involves adult and children's social care, 70% of their revenue goes on about 2 to 3% of their population. So it's really scary. And you
yeah.
will realize as a member of the public that the bins, the potholes, they take second place to something that statutory involves people's lives.
So what? Yeah. So this trend of devolution of these assets to town and parish councils, and also I mean, what are the? Obviously, it's got a particular. We all know what a public toilet is there for, but what are the kind of second and third order benefits of toilets in general? You know.
So you'll know, all of you, because you'll experience it both as a member of public and also as a chief executive of your council. Um, Delivering a play area and all the other S106 or SIL items that come through that allow you to help the public enjoy your spaces, you need a public loo by there, because ultimately the public will ask you for that. So that's the first thing. The second thing is that in high streets, when you close them, you get a really strong downturn in footfall, particularly from elderly people, because they don't feel it's easy to then go out and use a public facility because it's much more difficult to find them. So that's a point two. And the final thing, I think, from the point of view of the benefits associated with public loos, is they let your residents understand that you care about them and their environs, and make it easy for them to go out and enjoy the things and the facilities that you put in place at usually great expense.
And then what are the kind of, why would you, let's play devil's advocate, why would you positively avoid having a public toilet?
Well, because it's a pain. It's a pain to run. It's a pain to staff. It's a pain to keep up and running. It's a pain when it breaks. And there are some people have probably heard of the really lovely name of an activity called cottaging, which isn't quite so lovely in terms of when the public experience it. So that is generally two men going into a loo together to be friendly, shall we say? And then obviously there's it's a sort of safe space where you can lock the door and use IV drugs. That also can be a problem. And depending on where you are and how well it's looked after and how busy it is, it depends on how you deal with that issue going forwards. Because clearly there are people in society that need that sort of privacy in order to do the things they shouldn't be doing.
Good, good, good. So like what would your top tips be? Like let's just say one is doing a full installation from scratch,
Mm.
or two, you're going to take ownership of public facilities, public toilets from your county or district council. What are the
Well, the
things?
first thing is you're unlikely to do it. You won't be saying, fantastic, we get to look after the loos. You'll be threatened that they'll be shut if you don't, which is a bit of an issue going forwards. Then you've got to look at how much it's going to cost to run. And if it's a medium loo, sort of 5 to 6 cubicles in the ladies and say 2 or 3 in the gents, you're probably going to spend something around 25 grand looking after it. And that includes cleaning, probably 2 visits a day. And that's a big hit on your precept if your precept's around that figure.
What, 25
Part
grand?
of the rationale behind that is the fact that parish and town councils can move their precept as they choose, whereas the next tier up is limited to a 5% increase.
Okay. Um, so yes, so that's serious. Yeah, it's a serious amount of cash. So what is kind of the process of um kind of preparing? Like, yeah, so you're going to be receiving, I mean, I guess there's all the legal side of things, but what how would you prepare for taking ownership of, I mean, we're seeing now with devolution, some councils like going from no toilets to 10. It's quite extreme.
Well, I think in terms of getting ready for it, insist on some capital, insist on the unit being handed over in good nick, because that's really important. And sometimes council will back away from that and say no. Look at the terms. So ideally, you'd want a really strong lease that's long term rather than something that's a year and may cost you a quid. Because if you're going to invest in it, you want that investment to pay you back over time. You might want to charge for them. You might not. You might be taking on loos that are charged for actually, and you want to find out what the income is to offset the costs. Usually, it wouldn't fully cover it, but in some cases, it will. You want to work out whether the public want you to do that, ideally. And please don't go to the problem of a big referendum like you would have for the plan and things. But ultimately, you can, I think, from that perspective, look at what a risk it is to you as a council in terms of A, your level of precept, and B, the amount it's likely to cost going forward, and C, the benefit to the public, and whether it's going to be a good or a bad reflection on your duties as a parish, town, or other council.
Cool. I'm going to ask a few more questions with Chuck, but everyone else get ready with your own questions. You've got Chuck here for the next 45 minutes, so really maximize the opportunity to do that. What you'll do is you'll just raise your hand using I never know which one it is, React. Uh,
It is React, I think.
yeah, React. But anyway, you can also drop something in chat. But yeah,
There we
so
go. It's just to show you, there you are.
oh yeah, there you go. Cheers. Yeah, so kind of a couple of things in terms of future. I mean, also actually just the influence of gender identity on public toilet provision. How has that changed things over this over the
Well,
recent?
at this point in time, it's still in abeyance. We're still trying to work out exactly what the scenario is. The easiest get out is to and be careful with this process because you don't want to upset people. is to allow them to use a radar key to access your DDA loo, so that's your disabled loo. Most blocks will have one because it was required to put one in as the first loo, and I think everybody will have one as a result of that. And it is generally self-contained. So you go into it, there is a wash station as well as all the other things you'd expect in a loo. So that is one way of dealing with the issue. It isn't a large number of people that are transing. And actually, from the point of view of legality, it is only an offence. It's not an offence if you're transing to go into a gents or a ladies, depending on what side you're transing from and to. It's an offence if you do something to upset somebody. So generally, it will go undetected, but people might write to you if they see a particular individual that worries them. And obviously, they'll write to you if there's an issue.
Cool. Final question from me. Who are you really jealous of in terms of toilet provision, different countries around the world? What's like the most advanced tech happening in toilets? You know, which country is leading the way?
That's a really easy question to answer because it's Japan. And there is a movie around a person who looks after loos. And it's a fabulous movie to watch, but there is a completely different view, and I think we'll all understand this, about officialdom and Japanese people. They do what they're told generally, and there's a very, very decent sized minority in the UK that won't.
Perfect days. Cool. Yeah. So what kind of tech, you know, yeah, what kind of, yeah, what's an advanced toilet?
So you can walk into a loo and actually it will welcome you. So it'll lift up its lid. It'll say hi. What do you want to do? So there are some really major innovations, but that does involve things that we probably culturally, in most cases, are not used to. So you'll end up with your bottom sprayed and all of the above. But that's different areas and different specifics. Typically here, there's a wave-on flush, there's a hand dryer, there's in some cases a wall gate where you have soap, water, and air at the same time, one after the other. So there are lots of innovations which help, and I think probably the most important innovation for anybody who's not doing it is auto open. So at the beginning of the day, rather than go around and unlock them,
Yeah,
which
that's good.
costs
Yeah.
you a lot of money, you really want them to open at the time you tell them to open.
Okay, cool. And what's your, I mean, you actually, before we go into questions, what's Danfo do? And what's your kind of, you know, most proud project you've done in?
Well, if you look up danfo.co.uk, you'll see what we do. So it's a number of standalone public loos, but we also clean loos because we realize that, like any business actually, and like any operation, it's the last thing that somebody wants to do. So even when I was running a business in distribution, the only person who would go and clean the loo if it broke was the managing director because nobody else wanted to do it,
Yeah.
and you didn't want them to go home.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. So we're going to go over to thanks for that. Hopefully I did all right. How did I do with my fireside chat? That was my first.
I think you were lovely. I'd love to hug you.
Good, good. I appreciate that.
Theory, you should move towards that if you don't already have an accessible unit. And accessibility usually means something that's much bigger. You need to be able to turn a wheelchair around in it, and it needs a wider door. So if you don't have that, it's quite an involved process. You could have looked at the grants for changing places, which have now finished, where you could get 50 grand to help you do that. And a changing place unit is something where there's even a bed and a shower and all of the above. It's something worth exploring going forwards. So from that perspective, I think you can make a loo look fine from the outside in any sort of cladding, or you could knock it down and put something that is acceptable from the conservation officer's perspective. There is a requirement for you to deliver that DDA accessible loo. Cost you just for that one increase, probably around about 50, give or take, depending on what needs to be done. And then you've got to go through all that process of tendering and all that sort of stuff. But it's very possible. It's a necessity, and conservation officers will look at the typical elements in terms of whether we grant it or not on the basis of accessibility, and that's really important from a district council and a planning officer's perspective. No, but I'm going to speak to the minister tomorrow and see if we can find something in the Treasury's coffers, which are typically less than bare, actually. They're minus. So finding that will be hard, but it was only 30 million quid that was offered at the time. And that got snapped up fairly quickly, and it may still be underspent. So it's worth exploring it. And the organisation dealing with it at the moment is PAMS, but that's largely for Scotland. Which Northamptonshire isn't in yet, unless the Scottish decide to take it over. Number of things. So there's a product which has some interesting reviews called Mosquito, which is most of us, he says, looking probably are older, and it's a very high pitch noise for young people to discourage them from hanging around. They also say that, and I apologize to Barry Manilow now, playing Barry Manilow in the loo can push people away because it can be a little bit irritating for younger people, particularly drug dealers, and might send them off in the wrong direction. Not that they're not already there. So that's an example, but those new-ish doorbells and getting those connected, I appreciate you don't have Wi-Fi, but it might be worth investing in that, particularly since it is relatively easy to connect these days, even if you use an EE box or another equivalent, so that you can put some cameras up there and at least let them know. You can try dummy cameras, but they'll usually suss that quite quickly. And of course, your community police team will know where to go because they'll know, hey, oh, that's where the drugs are happening. So I think that's the sort of thing that you need to work towards. Also put up a note saying, even though you may or may not have it, CCTV is operating in this area. That tends to move people away, but people will do drug deals somewhere else. It's just a question of where you want them to go. There is, and it's a simple maglock setup. So effectively either a shear lock or a what would be a bolt chute, a chute lock, and they will open and close automatically. But you'll have a disengage button on the inside, so you just push it so you can open out. Sometimes actually the handle just works it. It's relatively easy to do, not hugely expensive, but about £1 for each one, roughly, providing you've got electric and that sort of stuff there. And they can be timed accordingly or indeed remotely. Yeah, so typically those loos are built off site. Ironically, Healthmatic and Danfo have factories next door to one another. Don't know why. And we'll produce it, clad it, and send it and drop it in, having prepared the base so that the sewage, the water, the electric are all easily collectible. Just go for 3 directly accessible cubicles, which have all the kit inside. Don't go down the urinal route, only because there are some issues with people saying, well, hang on a minute, you know, that urinal's working, but I can't get into the loos. What's happening? So I would just stick them to being effectively unisex. That gets you out of the problem associated with trans. You have to have a DDA loo. Your price for that ballpark is going to be around 200, give or take, depending on how difficult it is to pick up and drop off. You won't get much change out of 25 grand a year. For everything all in, including cleaning, and cleaning will run at about 15. That's a ballpark figure, and it depends on how busy it is in lovely Tandridge. I would say speak to your other parish and towns. They may have somebody that could add hours. You could find somebody locally, i.e. an individual, and look at so somebody who's cleaning houses and stuff like that. And that's a possibility, so they can add it to their round, or find somebody on benefit, and then you're looking at 16 hours max there to avoid it affecting their universal credit figures. All of those things are possible, and it's just worth you Facebooking it. It's not the most wonderful job prospect in the world, but there might be somebody who lives smack by it. So if I'm looking for staff, I'll put up little signs in the nearest shops, co-ops, pubs, and find if there's a cleaner there. I mean, it does actually work if you've got a pub in the village, and the pub uses an outside cleaner. So then you're
All
sort of
right, okay.
you're getting them there for nothing, if you get me. So
Yeah.
the most expensive part of the cleaner is when they're not cleaning, they're in the van driving to the next loo.
Yeah.
You can find advice on the British Toilet Association website, or indeed speak to us and I can give you that info. You can't use bleach, for example, because people don't like that, who react to it badly. And you've got to follow your own ISO procedures if you have that. But ultimately, anybody who's in the business will be able to help you with that, whatever size cleaning company they are, or if they're an individual, you can find the products for them. It's always to the wider audience, it's always important to have a storage area in your public loo, because you don't want somebody, particularly if they're walking or cycling to your unit to clean it, you don't want them to have to carry the stuff with them. Have a holding boiler. So ultimately, although to be fair, we don't do that at home, as in all of our houses, we don't do that. But if you have a holding boiler that's holding it below 55 degrees, then yes. If you're using a wall gate, it's effectively comes in cold, so and then there is no holding tank, so there's no requirement for Legionella there. If you're going to do it, you only need to do it once a year. But anybody will tell you whether you need to do it in your loo or not, based on the kit that you've got in there. If you were putting in a loo in a park, and this is a tip for everybody, try and let a concession there at the same time, and make sure that they support one another. It'll be a bit of a pain for them in the winter because clearly they're not doing so much trade, but it means that potentially they get a nice place in a park that's great and really busy in the summer, and they just got a bit of a set off during the winter, and you can deal with that during the rental negotiations, all of the above. Ideally, you want them to look after it, and usually they'll do it on the basis of a trade-off. There are countries where they say if you're offering food and you have a public loo, it's got to be open to the public and they don't have to buy anything. That might be a route that government takes in the future. Witherspoon's, for example, he has a policy which will allow anybody to use their loo without buying a drink, and usually their loos are really good in the Witherspoons. So it's just a question of finding the right partner to work with, and have what's called a community toilet scheme, and people will do that to be loved by the village more, and then they can put a little sign in the window which says, here we are, we're doing this for the community, etc., etc. You can leave a donation if you like, any of those things, but the donation would go to something in the village.
Cool. So what have we not spoke about today, Chuck? Anything missing? Any questions that you would have?
Well, I think anybody who is about to either become part of a unitary authority, there is definitely a toilet coming your way. So look out and actually make plans for it. So if you have a loo that's in your area that you're currently not looking after, become interested in it, because you want to know what it's like if and when they say, here you go, it's a quid, and we're going to close it if you don't look after it. So be interested in it. Speak to your residents and ask them what they think about your provision and whether there should be more there. The chances are that they'll want one at every play area that you're looking after, so it's like doubling the expense associated with that. But I think that's important if you find the busy ones, to make sure that there's a facility there that has some sort of protection devices around it, not just for the loo, but for the wider play area too. So that's an important thing. I think from the point of view of your general moves within your community, speak to other parish councils. It's often you can get your play area inspection on the same day as them, and it'll reduce the cost significantly. And we know we all have to do that every year. And ultimately, if you can do it at the same time as someone else is doing it, you'll drop your costs quite significantly, because the the ROSPA inspection will have to come in and can do it in a couple of hours. And so they could do 2 or 3 in the area if you program that together. So work with your other friendly clerks. And I think also be prepared for things like the M62 being diverted through your village, and try and negotiate that away. If National Highways is putting you on the diversion route, you might get them to give you some money. You never know.